He only gave up a seat. He couldn't bear the silent tears of two little girls. He didn't know their mother, nor did he know that in that moment, his life would change forever. Because sometimes, a seat opens the door to a new life, and you're about to witness this story. True kindness comes quietly. Don't forget to subscribe, because some stories reach from heart to heart. David was checking the morning mail when he didn't initially pay attention to the envelope hidden among the other bills and brochures. It was a faded, wrinkled envelope. Probably just another payment reminder, he thought, but something pushed him to open it. And the letter inside was opening a new door in his life. Dear David, we recently learned about your heroic intervention. Saving someone's life, especially doing so quietly, takes great honor. As a small token of our gratitude, we are gifting you a first-class flight ticket. Sincerely, Stellar Airlines. David's eyes shifted from the letter to the ticket. 1A, first class. He was about to board a plane for the first time. Even more than that, he would be leaving the town for the first time. He'd never felt he belonged anywhere except his small repair shop and his 8-year-old daughter, Emily. He still heard the echoes of the moment he pulled an elderly man from a burning car, someone who hadn't even asked his name. And David hadn't wanted it either. But now he was right in the middle of a change, starting with this seat. When Emily read the letter, she couldn't sit still from excitement. Dad, isn't this like VIP? Do they serve chips? David smiled. Maybe, he said. But if I don't take the card you drew for me, nothing counts. Emily had drawn a picture titled Sky Mission with a stick figure wearing a pilot's hat, flying a tractor instead of a plane. She'd added the note, "Don't forget the cookie." David stuck the card on his old metal lunchbox, putting in a shirt, a Western novel, and the 2 cookies Emily had made. The airport was unlike anything David had seen before. A massive world where everyone seemed to be rushing, digital sounds echoed, and security was filled with cold metal detectors. "First flight?" the ticket agent asked, noticing David's nervousness. "Is it that obvious?" David replied, scratching his head. The agent laughed. "Well, welcome, Mr. 1A. David's seat. It was a dream. Leather upholstery, a widescreen, polite cabin crew, and orange juice served in a real glass." He wiped the sweat from his forehead, placed the metal box on his knees, and tightened his seatbelt. A voice inside still said, "I don't belong here." Just then, something caught his attention. A crying child. Then another one. 2 little girls crying side by side. Their yellow curls looked the same and they were the same age. One was tugging at the flight attendant's arm, while the other was sobbing alone in the back row. The attendant shook her head and approached David. "There's been a mix-up. We separated the twins, but there's no empty seat." David didn't hesitate for a moment. "I can give up my seat," he said. "The kids should be together. I'll move to the back." The attendant widened her eyes. "But this is first class, sir. You don't have to do that." David smiled. "But they need this." Then he knelt down and tied one of the little girl's shoes. He pulled 2 cookies from his metal box and whispered with a chuckle, "These are magical. Only brave girls can eat them." The girls sniffed first, then smiled. "Are you a pilot?" one of them asked. David took off his mask, bending the ear flaps up like bunny ears. "Only if the clouds are looking," he said with a wink. The cabin was silent. Then a burst of laughter spread through the plane. The tension among the other passengers eased, and everyone was charmed by the scene. David helped the girls into their seats, buckled them in, and leaned down to say, "This seat is magical, but if you jump too much, it makes noises. Funny ones." The plane erupted in laughter. As David moved to the broken seat at the back of the plane, Emily's voice echoed in his head. "Maybe the world wants to thank you." But what David didn't know was that the girl's mother, sitting a few rows back, had quietly watched the whole thing. And that woman was the CEO of Stellar Airlines. And her life was about to change completely because of a choice David made, without even realizing it. Adriana Weber usually didn't pay attention to anyone during a flight. She didn't make eye contact with passengers, kept a very professional distance from the cabin crew, and didn't turn off her phone until the last second before sitting down. Being the CEO, especially of an airline, had made her distance herself over the years. Keeping that distance was her way of surviving. But that day, a simple seat change on the plane would suddenly break all her defenses. David passed by without the cabin crew even being able to tell her anything. That flannel shirt, quiet man. He had stood up from his seat without hesitation, not asking for a reward or expecting any thanks. Adriana was about to stand up when she saw her daughter's tears. Seeing Ellie and Nora apart like this was jarring for her too. But the kindness a stranger had shown her children. It had nailed her to her seat. It wasn't just what he did, but how he did it. Kneeling down, tying shoes, smiling while handing out cookies, making them laugh with his bunny ear mask. All of these were not PR stunts, they were instinctive acts of kindness. Adriana had never seen anything like this in her life. Not in meetings, not in public projects. Usually, good deeds were done in exchange for something. But this man, he had truly asked for nothing. He hadn't said his name, hadn't expected a glance. He had just stepped back and sat at the back of the plane. And no one had even noticed. Throughout the flight, Adriana's eyes kept drifting to her daughters, then to the man in the back row. David, long legs too big for his seat, had pulled his knees up and was reading a book from his metal box. He seemed lost in the pages, but in Adriana's mind, another page had opened. Something inside her that had been dormant for years, the role of perfect CEO, balanced mom, was shifting. Her daughters feeling safe, the presence of a stranger who made them laugh, and him doing it so effortlessly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. By the end of the flight, David had already disappeared from sight. Adriana, as she led Ellie and Nora off the jet bridge, searched the crowd for him but to no avail. "Mom, where did the bunny ear man go?" Ellie asked, raising her lollipop in the air. Adriana couldn't answer. The thought running through her mind was beyond a simple explanation. "I don't know, honey," she finally said, "but he must be going somewhere good." Just then, a flight attendant lightly touched her arm. "Ms. Weber," she said softly. "That gentleman's name is David Bauer. It was written on his boarding pass." Adriana swallowed. She hadn't even asked his name. Maybe she shouldn't have, but now it was too late. She had etched that name into her mind. That night, when the girls fell asleep, wrapped up in each other's arms, Adriana opened her laptop. Slowly, she typed into the search engine, David Bauer. The results were limited. No social media account. Not a company executive. A newspaper clipping popped up. "Young mechanic saves elderly man from burning car." The photo was grainy, but the flannel shirt was familiar. And those eyes, silent but alert. As Adriana scrolled through the page, she became immersed in her own silence. What had affected her so much wasn't just a man giving up his seat, but the fact that people like him still existed in the world. People who did good without any expectations, without needing to be noticed, just because it was the right thing to do. David Bauer, at that moment, had become something more than just a passenger in her eyes. Maybe a mirror, a reflection that made her realize her own shortcomings and gave her daughters not just security, but joy as well. She looked at the screen once more. The small business registration read, Redford Repair Shop, owner, David Bauer. Below it, a short sentence. For those who want to move forward with confidence. Adriana squinted her eyes. She had to find this man. Should she thank him, or should she do more? She didn't know the answer. But the one thing she knew for sure was that the scene on that plane would never leave her mind and might even change the course of her life. When David stepped off the plane, he still had the sound of laughter in his ears. The children's laughter, the passengers in the cabin, their shoulders relaxing with unexpected cheer. But most of all, he remembered the moment when the two little girls tightly gripped each other's hands. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. As the airport lights blinded him, he firmly placed Mia's drawing in his backpack. Dad's sky mission was still on the box. When the flight was over, the story seemed to be over too, or so David thought. No one was waiting for him at the baggage claim. With his small bag, the metal box hanging from his shoulder, and Mia's voice in his mind, he left the terminal. He didn't yet realize that he was already in the middle of something. He would later understand that the flight wasn't just a physical journey, but an inner one, and that journey had already begun in ways that couldn't be seen. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit room of the hotel, Adriana was still looking up David's name on her computer screen. The girls were deep in sleep. Ellie still had the untaken lollipop in her hand. Nora had buried her head in her pillow, whispering about the laughter from the flight in her sleep. Adriana was wide awake. For the first time in a long time, she was curious about a stranger, and this curiosity wasn't just personal. This man had shaken her system. She had attended countless meetings, signed many deals, and met hundreds of important people. But none had left an impact like the kindness of a 30-second gesture. A few hours later, when Adriana found out David's small town, it was a quiet place. There wasn't much information about him online. But there was still one thing Adriana had access to at her airline company: the flight manifest. The identity of the passenger who had moved from 1A to 28E was clear. He had a one-way ticket, but his return ticket hadn't been reserved. This meant he was still likely in the city. The next morning, while having breakfast with her daughters, Adriana made up her mind about her plan. Over the next few days, she would search for him. Not randomly, but quietly, carefully. Without realizing it, she wasn't just feeling gratitude for him, she was also realizing how mechanical her own life had become. And that realization, though uncomfortable, was refreshing. That same day, David was walking through the city streets with a coffee in his hand. The sky was clear, but the air was cloudy. There was no one to tell about the man who gave cookies to children instead of sitting in first class. But, in truth, there was no one he needed to tell. He already shared everything meaningful in his life with Emily. Even the reason for this trip was her. To show her more, to make the word "Dad" mean more, to inspire hope for the future again. When he sat down on a park bench by the side of the road, he pulled out Mia's card from his pocket. The corners of the card were a little worn, but the colors were still vivid. "Just stay true," it said with a small heart. David couldn't understand why that sentence felt so heavy now. Maybe finding out what was truly right had become more complicated. And then, the voice coming from behind him would change the rhythm of his life. "Excuse me, are you David Bauer?" David looked up. A serious but warm-looking woman stood before him. Beside her were two little girls, excitedly holding colorful drawings. Ellie stepped forward and shouted, "Captain Bunny!" Nora followed. "We found you." David smiled. "Oh my God, my crew," he said, crouching down. "Did you have a smooth flight?" Adriana stood a few steps back, watching them. She said nothing. Her eyes were full of tears. For the first time in a long while, she felt that her life was this random, yet this right. David turned to the girls. "Today's a special day because Captain Bunny's adventure is still going on. What do you say? Are you ready for a new mission?" The girls screamed, "Yes." Adriana stepped forward and gently extended her hand. "I'm Adriana. I'm their mom." David shook her hand. That handshake went beyond a thank you. It was a greeting, a turning point, perhaps even the beginning of a whole new life. But in that moment, they both simply smiled. Because some things don't have a name. Not yet. As David shook Adriana's hand, he couldn't quite make sense of the brief, jarring impulse inside him. The way the woman dressed, her posture, even how she chose her words. She seemed like someone from another world. But the strange part was that, at that moment, it felt like their worlds had somehow crossed paths, and that intersection wasn't fake. It was instinctive. "We owe you a meal," Adriana said, carefully choosing her words. "The girls are still talking about your flight. Last night, Ellie asked 4 different versions of, 'What happens if the seat makes noise?'" David laughed. "It's a serious issue," he said, mimicking a serious tone. "If that seat makes noise, the whole plane has to start dancing." Adriana couldn't help but laugh. That was when she began to understand why David was so compelling. This man wasn't trying to draw attention, wasn't trying to shine. He was just real. and that was a quality nearly lost in her world. Maybe that's why the idea of spending an evening with him didn't feel intimidating. In fact, it was reassuring. That evening, they met at a quiet Italian restaurant in the city. For the girls, it was almost like a magical event. Nora had named her spaghetti Adventure Snake, while Ellie called the chef's apron the White Magical Cape. David wasn't the man who forgot cookies. He was the man who created new laughs with his stories. When he tried making his bunny ears again, even the waiter couldn't help but laugh. Adriana mostly watched, observed. The connection David had with the girls, the way he leaned down to their eye level when listening, the care he took in choosing his words. It reminded her of something new, what it truly meant to be loved, to be respected, and to be cared for. She had only experienced the corporate versions of these things: meeting rooms, investor welcomes, high-level decision-making. But what was real was this, the sincerity David held in his hands. After dinner, David pulled out a small gift, a handmade little metal keychain. At the end of the keychain was a tiny wrench. It had these words engraved: "Friendship Fixer. Every pilot should have good-hearted helpers," David said, looking at the girls. "And that's you." The girls hugged him with shining eyes. Adriana had a lump in her throat. She still hadn't said anything, just watching him. His sincerity, his lack of pretense. Without even realizing it, David was bringing out something in her life that had been suppressed. Not the desire to be loved, but the courage to love. That night, as they walked back to the hotel, the girls were sleepily walking beside David. Ellie mumbled, half asleep, "Can we be together again tomorrow?" David hesitated but then looked at Adriana. "Tomorrow? What do you think?" Adriana didn't hesitate. "We're staying a few more days. And if you'd like." "I'd like that," David said, finishing the sentence without hesitation, smiling. "I just have a half granola bar and a life without a return ticket. I don't think the city's done with me yet." That night, as Adriana sat next to her girls, curled up in bed, she smiled without thinking. What had happened in those few hours couldn't be compared to the perfect order she had once thought she had. And that difference didn't scare her. On the contrary, it warmed her. Meanwhile, David, in his small hotel room, had taken Mia's drawing in his hand. It was worn now, but still vibrant. The paper with Dad's Sky Mission written on it was no longer just a symbol, but a bridge. A step that had taken him into a whole new story. And for the first time in a long while, David had started imagining something for the future. When David returned to the workshop in the morning, he wasn't thinking about the time on his watch, but about the time in his heart. The girls had promised to meet again when they left the hotel, but this time, David felt something different. It wasn't the ache of uncertainty. It was the sound of something that needed to continue. And that sound wasn't like the ones he was used to. This time, it was a feeling of wanting to stay, not run away. As he left the hood of an old truck open on the workbench, the door opened. It was Adriana. She had coffee in hand. No security, no assistant, no screen. The distance he'd felt when he first saw this woman was no longer there. It had been replaced by something else. Familiarity, trust, and maybe longing. "I came to thank you for these," she said, holding up the coffees she'd handed to David. A sort of first-flight gift. David smiled. No cookies, but hot coffee counts. The silence between them was full. Felt like breaking it would take something away. But Adriana dared to break it. "The girls haven't stopped talking about you. Last night, Nora drew you as a good-hearted space mechanic." David tilted his head. "I'm going to tell Mia everything. But do you know what I'll tell her most? The way I saw you love them with a courage they didn't even know they had." Adriana's eyes filled with tears. "The girls saved my life. I just forgot how to live it. Until I saw you." Those words stirred something inside David. The David who had been silent for so long, just working and taking care of Emily, carrying the weight of the past, was finally resting for the first time. And what he was hearing wasn't a success story that didn't belong to him. It was a truth that touched the very center of his heart. At that moment, Adriana took one more step forward. "We're leaving tomorrow, but it doesn't feel like leaving." David furrowed his brow, but his eyes were still soft. I don't want to leave either. I mean, if you're talking about leaving a place or a feeling, then I've already arrived. Adriana took a small envelope from her pocket. Inside, there was a drawing. It was her own sketch. 5 people sitting on a porch, trees stretching up into the sky in the background, a box of cookies on the ground, and a sign in the middle. This is where the heart lands. David took the drawing in his hand. He stared at it for a long time. You drew this. I used to be an architect. I used to draw. Then I became a CEO. Instead of lines, I started drawing schedules. But that night, the evening with you and the girls, something inside me came back. David carefully folded the paper and put it in his pocket. So, drawing is a kind of healing too. Adriana nodded. And healing, just like what you did. But not just with engines, with people too. At that moment, the door opened again. Emily walked in, carrying books and wearing a patched-up backpack. Dad, she called. Then she saw Adriana. She paused for a moment but then quietly approached them. Adriana bent down. You must be Mia. The girl nodded. You're the woman from the bunny ears story. David smiled. Emily, this is Adriana. Adriana, this is the person where everything began. Emily looked at the woman shyly. Did you bring cookies? Adriana laughed and reached into her bag. Not homemade, but do the cookies I stole from the hotel count? Emily nodded. They count. At that moment, the 3 of them were finally in the same frame. They weren't strangers anymore. And in that frame, it wasn't just smiles, it was the possibility of a future. They were like people standing on the edge of a whole new page, free from their past. David took the old plane ticket out of his pocket. The one for 1A, the seat he hadn't sat in. He attached Mia's note to the back. Sometimes doing the right thing takes you to the right place. Adriana looked at it, silently reading. This might be the most right thing I've ever heard. David handed her the ticket. I gave up that seat, but I've kept this ticket. Because it gave me a life. Maybe one day, it will be the ticket to a plane we board together. Adriana reached out and took it. Then, don't get the return ticket, okay? And for the first time, they both thought at the same time. Maybe life sometimes starts with just changing a seat, but it takes you somewhere completely different. Autumn seemed to quietly cover the town. The colors were softer, and the air cooler. But David felt warmer than ever. With a new piece of wood in his hand, he sat at the corner of the porch, sanding down a small sign. The words weren't finished yet, but the plan was clear. Welcome. A life changed by a chair. Emily, a few meters away, had blended into the chalk drawings stretching down the street, alongside Nora and Ellie. Captain Flannel's headquarters was written in large letters, with cookies and hugs available. As the children's laughter filled the air, David looked up. That was when he saw Adriana on the porch steps. She was wearing a simple sweater, holding a mug in her hands. Morning walk? David asked. No, Adriana replied, stepping down the stairs to join him. Today, I chose to stay instead of walk. Her words stirred something inside David. A lot had happened in the past few weeks, but nothing had really named itself yet. Now, that name was staying together. What was temporary was turning into something permanent. Slowly, silently, but with roots growing deep. Adriana pulled a letter out of her pocket and handed it to David. I wrote to the board, she said. I've officially taken leave. From now on, I'll plan my life not by flight schedules, but by my heartbeat. Before David opened the letter, he looked into her eyes. Are you sure about this? Adriana shook her head. No, I just don't think I've ever made such the right decision before. In that moment, something shifted between them. No confession was needed, no contract. Because they both knew one thing now. This was a journey with no turning back, but for the first time, neither one would go and leave the other behind. Emily, Nora, and Ellie ran over to them, each with a cookie box in hand. Sweet crisis alert, Emily shouted. Pretty soon we'll all be in a sugar coma. David smiled. As Captain Flannel, I hope I can keep this situation under control. That evening, they had dinner around a small table with everyone gathered. Nothing was fancy. The table was full of cookie crumbs, homemade drawings, and the sound of laughter more than utensils clinking. Unlike the elegant dinner parties Adriana once hosted in Michelin-starred restaurants, this table was, for the first time, truly full, with heart. After dinner, David, with Emily's help, brought out a small table for the porch. It held a wooden-framed small box. Inside was the unused first plane ticket for 1A, the one that had changed his life. On it was Mia's handwritten note. "This seat now works from heart to heart." Adriana stared at the box for a long moment. "It all started with just a seat, didn't it?" David nodded. "Yes, but no seat had ever been this valuable before. Not until it taught those two little girls how to smile." Adriana turned to him, narrowing her eyes. "And what about you? What did it teach you?" David paused. Then, as his eyes held hers, he answered, "Sometimes a person just gets through life by surviving. But then someone comes, sits quietly, and for the first time you realize you're really living." That night, as the kids were tucked into bed one by one, only David and Adriana remained on the porch. The sky was full of stars. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was enveloping. Adriana gently whispered, "Do you think this is a beginning, or a long overdue recovery?" David took her hand, firmly. "Neither," he said. "This is the perfect timing for what was meant to be." Adriana closed her eyes. They sat in silence for a long while. Then, slowly, Adriana rested her head on David's shoulder. "So, what now?" David looked up at the sky. Now we'll just sit here, in this seat, in this house, in this life, together." And so, a man gave up a plane seat, but in exchange he settled into a life. A woman let go of controlling the sky and, instead, took root in the warmth of the earth. And 3 little children witnessed the beginning of not just a holiday, but a family. Because sometimes, a seat changes everything.